All right, welcome back to video number 5 of Inner Permaculture. And in this video, we're going to be getting into defining permaculture. But before we do that, let's start off with a quote by Bill Mollison again. And it goes like this: "Though the problems of the world are increasingly complex, the solutions remain embarrassingly simple." Right? Now that's a pretty famous one. Anyone who's been around permaculture long enough, I'm sure, has heard that quote. And in the previous videos, I've been talking about the problems and the solution, right? And the root cause and all that. But isn't this where we're stuck? This is the heart of all this work that I'm trying to put out there is, if the solutions are embarrassingly simple, then why aren't they being solved? What's stopping us from, putting these solutions forth? So again, that's the heart of this work, and it's, understanding that doing the inner work must be done in order for the outer work to truly work. And when I talk about this stuff, it's about the inner work being done on an individual level, but it's really about the consciousness of all of humanity. But of course, it starts with you or me or one person at a time, the individual, in order for the society to truly transform, which is what permaculture is really all about. It's not about gardening, and that's why I played those 2 clips in the last video, and I'm gonna replay them because I feel like repeating information is totally necessary for people to absorb the knowledge. It takes time. You gotta hear things over and over again, and that's why I always will be repeating myself in these videos. But the main point here, and I'm gonna replay the videos in just a few seconds, is that permaculture didn't come about as a gardening system. It came about, as how can we make the world a better place? And it does start on an individual level, but we want to spread it out to the world. So of course it's not just a gardening system. Then it would just be like, what's the point? The point of permaculture is to spread, and it's not about you. It's not a gardening system for you. So let's start again over with these videos, and then we'll get into the definition further.
Permaculture has always been much more than a gardening system. It arose from questioning of the 60s and the previous questioning of the 1890s and the 1930s about why this society, with all its skills and intelligence and resources, keeps falling into holes of its own making. And the word permaculture really was said to be from permanent agriculture, but I always had it in mind that it was from a permanence in culture itself.
I suppose that origin point of permaculture, of thinking about how we could redesign agriculture based on the principles in nature, was part of a sort of a larger recognition that agriculture is the core human activity on the planet by which we provide for our needs. Of course, it's sort of become masked by the massive tapping of fossil fuels over the last 250 years, but agriculture is, in a sense, still the most important and the most problematic activity on the planet.
Sorry, I did say I was going to be repeating myself a lot in these videos, but if you've been following along in the first few videos, then you'll know that it's not agriculture that's the most problematic. Agriculture is just an effect, and it's an effect of that root cause, right? It's the consciousness, it's the mind that has been the most problematic.
So there was good reason for permaculture starting there, but it was always really about how we redesign everything we do, and in fact redesign our lives. So that element of permanent agriculture and permanent culture was, as a seed there at the beginning. But permaculture, certainly in the early decades, was very strongly associated with agriculture and growing things, and in the popular consciousness, a cool form of organic gardening, really. And that's been a sort of a powerful way that it is spread, but it's had a downside that it's tended to be sort of ignored in the formalities and the serious consideration of sustainability issues of, oh yes, it's just a form of gardening.
All right, so I play those videos so everyone can see that the two guys, the founders of permaculture, the guys who coined the word, also had it in mind that permaculture is much, much more than a gardening system, right? That they're also talking about culture itself. All right, so let's break it down. I'm going to be using etymology here, Etym Online, for the definitions of the words. So let's just start with permanent. Permanent, enduring, unchanging, unchanged, lasting, or intended to last indefinitely. Early 15th century, from Old French, permanent. Permanent, or directly from Latin permanentum, remaining, present participle of permanere, endure, hold out, continue, stay to the end. From per, through, that's the root is per, and then forward, hence, through, and then menere, stay, to remain. I mean, it gets gets pretty deep getting to the root of the definition of permanent. But like I said, permanent, very simple. Everyone knows what permanent means. And but we got to go through it, right? If we're gonna define permaculture, then permanent becomes the prefix for permaculture. So let's go to agriculture. All right. Agriculture in the Etym Online etymological dictionary. Mid-15th century, again, tillage, cultivation of large areas of land to provide food. From Latin agricultura, cultivation of the land. A contraction of agricultura, cultivation of land. And it's from agri, A-G-R-I, and which means fields. And cultura, cultivation. So when you combine agri, which means a field or land, you get, and you combine it with culture, you get the cultivation of land. All right, so there you see the intention there is when you combine the two words, you get an enduring way of cultivating the land, right? How do we design? And design is, of course, a key word in permaculture. How do we design systems so we're growing food, cultivating the land that is enduring, and the ecological foundation remains? Okay, now here's where it gets really interesting. When we take it to the word culture on its own, right, and we take a deeper look into its origin, and we've already been there when we broke down the word agriculture. But what most people don't realize is that with the word culture, there's a metaphor involved. So let's go ahead and take a look at the etymology of culture again. Culture, mid-15th century. Again, the tilling of land, act of preparing the earth for crops. From Latin cultura, a cultivating agriculture, figuratively care, culture, and honoring, from past participle stem of colere, to tend, guard, to till, to cultivate. All right, so there you can see that the origin is in, the cultivation and tilling of land. And isn't it interesting that that word today is being used to describe our societies? Why did they choose that word as, to describe society? And let's have a look at the next paragraph. The figurative sense, also you could say the metaphorical sense of cultivation through education, systematic improvement and refinement of the mind, is attested by around the year 1500. Century Dictionary writes that it was not common before the 19th century, except with strong consciousness of the metaphor involved, right? The metaphor involved. So you could see that, back then, although the word culture wasn't commonly used to describe society, that within the consciousness there was this knowing, there was that the metaphor of, yes, the cultivation of the land to produce a desired outcome, and in that metaphor of the cultivation of the minds, the cultivation of the populations, the cultivation of the society to produce that desired outcome that you want. And then it wasn't until around the 19th century where the word culture began to take hold and being used in the vocabulary to define and describe society, and all the way up until present day, where it's commonly used, yet that metaphor seems to have lost its meaning, right? And so if we look at the origin of culture, we see the word cultivation, and cultivation is strongly associated with care. And yet we know that in today's world of big agriculture, there's a huge lack of care. And in permaculture, we're trying to bring that care of the earth, right? The ethics, the care of the earth, the care of the people. And, how does this metaphor translate in today's world? If we look at the cultivation techniques of big agriculture, and we know that they're involving large-scale monocultural farming and heavy reliance on machinery and chemical inputs and pesticides, the GMO crops, and that greed, aiming at the high yields at the cost of the environment, and ultimately, mining the soil, eroding and depleting the life of the soil, the mining of the soil. And so with the metaphor in place, how does that translate in today's world when it comes to the cultivation of the people, the cultivation of society, with that lack of care, the lack of care not being there? How does that play out? And who are the ones cultivating? Who are the ones tending to the gardens of our minds? Are you being programmed? Are you being who you truly want to be, or are you being who society wants you to be? Is your mind being mined? Are our minds being mined? And these are questions that I'm going to continue asking, and we're going to explore much further and go deeper into these topics. But for now, let's just go to the modern day definition of culture, because I think this is where Bill Mollison and David Holmgren, when they're talking about the permanence in culture, without going so deep like I did into culture and the origin of it, that, if you look up the word culture, and as we know it today, culture can be defined as all the ways of life, including arts, beliefs, and institutions of a population that are passed down from generation to generation. Culture has been called the way of life for an entire society. As such, it includes codes of manner, dress, language, religion, rituals, and art. Simply put, the ways of life, the customs, the beliefs of a society, right? The ways of life. And so when you take the two words permanent and culture, you get that enduring way of life, or a way of life that lasts. And when we take it back to the origin, and we combine permanent and culture with also keeping cultivation in mind, we get perpetual care. And so there you have the double definition of permaculture. A permanent agriculture, which is more widely known and represents the outer work and the transformation of the outer scape. And then a permanent culture, which is lesser known and represents the inner work and the transformation of the inner scape. And now that we know both definitions, we takes us back to that ancient Hermetic principle of correspondence, right? As within, so without, which brings us awareness that a permanent agriculture for humanity is only possible with a permanent culture. In other words, if the solutions are embarrassingly simple, then what is it going to take to put them into effect? Right? It's going to be much, much more than just transforming the landscape. Right? We need to dig deeper and do that inner work in order to create that enduring society, right? That way of life that lasts, that permanent culture, that permaculture, right? We need to go inside. We need to do that inner work. We need to cultivate the garden of our minds in order to put those solutions into effect. And so really, that is the goal of permaculture, right? It's a way of life that lasts. It's not about getting some land and going into the woods and living off the grid, right? It's not a gardening system for you. It's about humanity and all the beings on earth as a whole. And how do we design a way of life that lasts? And so what is it that we need to know, right? What are the key understandings, some of which I've already covered in previous videos, but what else? Like, what are the key understandings that we need to know in order to create a culture that isn't polluting and poisoning itself, a culture that isn't destroying and enslaving itself, right? And so, I'm still just getting started here, and we've got a long way to go on this inner path, right? This inner journey, right? The inner permaculture. We're going to keep digging away at that root cause. But for now, thank you for joining me in this episode of Defining Permaculture. And in the next video, we're going to have a deeper exploration of care, right? Of just care itself. Because really, who the hell cares, right? It doesn't seem like a lot of people care. That's what they tell me. They're like, I don't care. And just like I said, like, we're lacking a lot of care when it comes to the cultivation of our society that is that huge lack of care. So we'll be taking a deeper look into that. And then, of course, the ethics of permaculture, right? Care of the earth, care of the people. And yet it seems that many people who are into permaculture don't even care about the ethics. So care, again, is very much part of the inner work. So thanks for joining me, and I'll see you next time.